Hi everybody, Rad Mom here. Welcome back to the channel. This week we're doing something a little educational. I found something from PBS talking about what is gender. And it is a very straightforward, middle of the road educational presentation of this modern concept that we're all dealing with. It's from a few years ago, but as far as a starting point for the conversation, I think it's really sort of perfect. Because it represents the attitude that has become ubiquitous.
What is gender, and how does it differ from sex? Human sex is usually linked to biological and physical traits of the body.
Usually? What else does it have to do with? As opposed to gender, as we shall see, which is a multifaceted concept indeed.
These can include reproductive organs, hormones, chromosomes, with the old wisdom being that XX chromosomes signal females while XY chromosomes are indicative of males.
The old wisdom? Spoiler alert, she's not actually going to say anything to contradict this. There is no new wisdom.
Outward appearance of the genitalia, and secondary sex characteristics, which kick in around puberty for humans.
Is anyone else flashing back to like 5th grade right now?
These traits include things like growing breasts, getting hairy, or producing all of that lovely oil and grease that makes our pits stink and our T-zones shine bright like a diamond.
This is so strange how this is essentially the like sex ed video they show you when you're a kid, right? With this goofy old-fashioned music playing behind it?
Although these are the ways that sex is determined or identified, it also involves a fair bit of fluidity. For example, there are people who are intersex, meaning that they share a variety of these traits across the sexual divide.
Intersex people, according to the United Nations, make up 1.7% of the global population. And if you're born that way, you are that way for life, just like everyone else.
People can have XX chromosomes associated with women, but present in most other ways as male, and vice versa.
Technically speaking, to my understanding, if you have a Y chromosome, you are technically a male person, because that is all the Y chromosome does.
It's also possible to have a mixture of these traits that aren't easily quantifiable and don't align neatly with male or female designations.
Most people, the vast majority of humankind, are either male or female, straightforwardly. So straightforwardly, in fact, that we're going to get to see all of the different ways that we've been creative around that in various cultures around the world, as if that somehow disproves the thing it's all built around.
But while sex is mostly considered biological,
what else is sex? Other than an activity. But that's not what we're talking about.
Gender is its more loosely defined cousin. Gender relates to the performance of roles, identities, and ideas surrounding masculine, feminine, or neutral traits. And more often than not, we link gender to both outward behaviors and internal ideas about ourselves.
This is the definition of gender that I think we all commonly use. Don't get comfortable though, because we're about to wander off into the weeds really far, really fast.
A good example of performing gender in society would be a statement like, all girls' favorite color is pink. The first assumption is that girl lines up with female sex.
Watch them gaslight you. The idea that girl is a female is not an assumption. That's the word for that. That's not an assumption, that is a definition.
And the second is that given the choice, most, if not all girls, will not only choose pink as their favorite color, but will also be naturally predisposed to liking pink over other colors. But this idea confuses cultural conditioning with a presumed biological determinism.
Biology does not determine your personality. This is true. It does influence it though. I sure wish we could talk about that.
Gender also blossoms outward into other areas of our lives and is often used as a measure for sexual desire, behavior, and societal roles. We also apply gender pretty widely and often, even to concepts and inanimate objects, more so than biological sex.
Gender is applied broadly because it is used as a framework to interact with concepts in the world. Sex is none of those things.
Take, for example, some Indo-European languages like Spanish, German, and Latin, where gender is used to conjugate certain verbs or attach to nouns and pronouns.
Now we have wandered a bit far from the point, right? Gender, in grammar, is from the same root as genre. It means category. It is a grammatical method of connecting nouns and verbs that we don't really have in English. It is unrelated to the meaning of the noun. It started out as loose categories along sex lines in Latin, 2,000 years ago, and has loosely evolved over time in various different languages. But it does still all come back to the basic fact of male and female that the vast majority of humanity does adhere to. And like, I don't even know what to do with this. I took 5 years of German. Der Affe is a masculine noun. So that's just wrong. And it's a silly mistake and it doesn't really mean anything, but like, I can't let that slide entirely. I don't know what to do with that.
So while both sex and gender are not hard and fast across the board, both are more often than not linked together and then described to us using two choices: male sex aligning with masculine gender, and female sex aligning with feminine gender.
And there's a reason for that consistency, isn't there? It's almost like they're all describing something that is observable in the material world.
But while the concept of two sexes and two genders is ingrained in us as the cultural norm, this hasn't always been universally true.
The concept of two sexes has always been universally true, yes. And nothing she's about to say is going to contradict that.
That leads us to our next question. What are the alternatives to the binary gender model? Well, in fact, outside of the West, many cultures and countries have a history that recognizes either gender fluidity or gender categories that exist beyond the binary. Prior to colonization, the Incas worshipped a dual-gendered god, whose attendants, the Qoriwarmi, wore androgynous clothing and represented a third gender space.
As if before colonization were necessarily some greater, better time in history. Oh, but it gets so much worse.
Among the Sakalavas of Madagascar, boys who were considered feminine in appearance were raised as girls.
What? Who were feminine appearance were raised as whom? Like, okay, cross-dressing is only a thing because binary sex is immutable. So many exceptions that demonstrate the rule. Gender bending just shows how sex doesn't change.
In Hawaii, Kanaka Malawi indigenous societies had the mahu, who could be aligned with any biological sex.
Did you catch that? The wording is so slimy to me. It's so devious, could be aligned with any sex. How many are there? Has she said anything yet that actually demonstrates there's more than two?
But expressed a gender role that was in between masculine and feminine. And the Bernicia of Albania are women who have sworn a vow of chastity and dress as men.
Who dress as what now?
So the concept of more than two genders has existed and still exists worldwide.
That there are more than two social roles human beings can fill does not prove there are more than two sexes.
But concepts that biological sex and gender could be fluid also existed in parts of Western Europe. Prior to the 18th century and the rise of Enlightenment thinking in Europe, there was a theory that men and women's reproductive organs could belong to a common sex, even though they were assigned to different gendered roles. So there was one sex, but two genders.
That's like saying they're both human. What a concept.
In the 2nd century AD, Greek physician Galen noted, "Turn outward the woman's, turn inward, so to speak, and fold double the man, and you will find the same in both in every respect."
See, even pre-Enlightenment people saw things differently. The ancients knew better than us.
That's right, he was of the opinion that women were essentially men with penises that had been flipped up inside of their bodies and not fully developed, and vice versa on the male side of things. Which isn't so kooky when you consider that physicians at that time also believed that women's female hysteria was caused by wandering wombs.
Wait a minute. Is this supposed to be evidence for or against your position? You just discredited your own source.
And while this wasn't a universally held belief, the idea that male and female reproductive organs were somehow two sides of the same coin persisted until the Renaissance.
What happened in the Renaissance to all of a sudden make men and women not two sides of the same coin?
And just like class, gender was given a hierarchy and attached to ideas about innate qualities. So someone of high birth was considered inherently better than someone from a lower class. And the same went with gender, which valued masculine traits and behaviors over all else. And the category of gender was also linked with emerging categories such as race and long-held beliefs like class. So white, male, or masculine folks—
Whoa. Masculine folks. Are you trying to say that those women at the time just needed to take on masculine qualities and they would have succeeded in the world in the same way?
White, male, or masculine folks of high birth placed themselves at the top of the pyramid.
Yes, they did. Men. White men. Don't let them off the hook like that.
and created complex systems that trickled outward from that center point. But that doesn't mean that there weren't alternatives that existed across complex societies prior to colonization.
We're not just talking about colonialism here. This gets so much deeper.
With the dawn of Enlightenment thinking and the resulting revolutionary uprisings around the world, think American Revolution, Haitian Revolution, and the French Revolution to name a few, we start to see language about the rights of man that looked to upset one key part of the hierarchy, class, as it was associated with free voting white men. But all of this language about men having rights wasn't thinking of the universal term of man, meaning all human beings, as it was in the past, but rather specifically linked to race, gender, and sex.
They narrowed what the category of man meant, didn't they? Because they pulled a linguistic trick. Man, in English, comes from the Anglo-Saxon man, which meant people. And they had Vapenman and Vifman for man and woman, person, and then there were two sorts of people. Mankind goes all the way back to the Anglo-Saxon times 1,000 years ago. The general usage of man as meaning the whole group of people was antiquated. So they just sort of phased it out and replaced it with the modern meaning of the word man as in male person. White male person, usually.
So it's in the 18th and 19th century that we start to see a further codification of these accepted binaries, even though concepts of them existed prior to this point.
But so this is exactly the kind of linguistic trick that y'all are trying to pull now with the word woman. The fact that they got this woman to speak this bullshit is one of the most offensive bits about this whole thing, isn't it?
According to Alberto Alsina, Paolo Giuliano, and Nathan Nunn in their article on the origins of gender roles, Women in the Plow, some of this may be broken down to the assignment of labor roles. They found that, consistent with existing hypotheses, the descendants of societies that traditionally practice plow agriculture today have less equal gender norms, measured using reported gender role attitudes and female participation in the workplace, politics, and entrepreneurial activities. So societies that spread more traditional agricultural roles as a whole had less gender equality than those that did not.
Traditional agricultural roles, meaning the plow? The plow was invented in the Middle East 4,000 years ago. Ancient Egyptians had the plow. The plow has nothing to do with white supremacy. The plow has nothing to do with colonialism other than the fact that ancient American people did not have it. Without it, the Maya struggled to feed themselves. They and the Inca both relied on rain to keep the soil soft so that they could plant stuff with sticks. The Aztecs ate a whole lot of fish and killed a whole lot of people. The descendants of their civilizations now speak Spanish and Portuguese. Are we meant to question agriculture itself? These evil colonial gender roles are all linked back to the control of farming through traditional agricultural roles, meaning use of the plow. How are you supposed to feed people? And this is what I'm talking about when I say that it just gets really, really deep here. We are so far off the point. We're implying essentially that plow agriculture is on par with colonialism on the level of evil. This is so awful. I'm not going to be the first in line to defend a civilization and whatever, but farming feeds people.
It comes as no surprise then that with the rise of colonization, which often looked to regulate and standardize farming practices across different regions, that we also see a solidification of gendered roles becoming the norm.
I'm sorry, I'm sure you don't mean to imply that indigenous women were not seen as laborers. Right?
But the word gender started circulating in academic discourse and broader cultural discussions around the midpoint of the 20th century.
Is it me or did we just jump forward 100 years?
As everyday people began to push back openly and critically about the role that gender played in their lives. We see all of these conversations about gender and gender norms playing crucial roles in the movements for LGBTQIA rights and visibility, civil rights, and feminist critique. So, how does it all add up? Gender is still circulating in our everyday lives, from which color you paint your newborn's bedroom to which box we check off for our licenses at the DMV.
Which is a beautiful summary, actually, because it succinctly explains the difference between the concepts socially that we surround ourselves with and apply to ourselves and other people, and like biological sex. In case you're in an accident and you need a blood transfusion, which sex you are matters. And that's why it's on your driver's license. Those two things are just not equivalent at all, are they? It's almost as if we're talking about two separate things. One of which is a social concept that you can play with all you like, because the other is immutable and will never change. Gender is the first one. It's actually a mystery how much of it is real, because considering we live in our brains, where is the line between biology and behavior? Personally, I think it's a feedback loop that would be really, really interesting to discuss and dissect and learn about how that works. And we're never going to get to do that as long as we're playing these weird semantic games. Thank you for joining me for this exploration of what is gender. I have been Rad Mom. Come back at the top of the hour for the live stream and discussion where we always keep it lively, and I will see you there and next time with a brand new video. All right, thanks, bye.